Mm. Hi, sir.
Roshni?
No,
Roshni,
yeah, I can hear you, sir.
can you hear me? Okay, good. Sorry, my app was little old for Zoom because we don't use Zoom for meetings. We only use this webinar and WebEx. So we've been not using Zoom for a long time. So I need to update my Zoom. I believe it didn't allow me to log in for some time.
Absolutely, I completely understand.
Yeah.
So, sir, if you can just allow me about 5 minutes, so I can just give a
Sure,
quick
sure.
introduction.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Take your time. I'm all set.
So, today, everyone, is a spotlight webinar on auditory brainstem implant by Professor Ranjith Rajeswaran. I will just give you a quick introduction about the speaker. He is the Chief Audiologist at MD of Murph Institute of Speech and Hearing. He is a pioneer in the field of cochlear implants and auditory rehabilitation for adults with cochlear implants. He is renowned all over the world for his work. He, along with Dr. Mohan Kameshwaram, has contributed tremendously to the field of cochlear implants in India and abroad. He has more than 23 years of experience working in cochlear implants and worked with more than 5,000 patients with CI. His best awards are Best Teacher Award by the government-owned Tamil Nadu Dr. MGR Medical University and scientific awards in the field of cochlear implants at many international and national conferences. In 2000, uh, Ranjit and Mohan sir started the cochlear implant education program for the parents for the first time in India and still continues to do so for many parents. They started the first auditory habitation training program in India. Well, in the first few webinars that we had discussed over the summer, we talked about hearing loss, COVID-19, the type of hearing loss, and I'll just give you a heads up on what we learned. The thing is, when it comes to cochlear implants, we know that there's an internal and external part of cochlear implants, and these are the steps that I have mentioned here with the picture. Well, here we have the sound processor from where we hear the sound through the processor. The sound is then there is a coded signal transmitted across the skin. So that means what we hear through the processor it goes to the magnet and then it is passed through this magnet here inside through the inside implant and this gets delivered to the intercochlear inside through the electrodes and then it is then there is something called spinal ganglion cells. This is probably hair cells in layman English, which simulates auditory information received through the cochlear and it is sent to the brain. Then we have different types of implants. Hearing aids and cochlear implants are the two different types of machines we use to hear. And then we have bone conduction implants and cochlear implants and auditory brainstem implant. Well, I chose to discuss about auditory brainstem implant because it's the rarest type of implant that we look for. And today, Ranjit sir will speak about it. I'll let you take over, sir.
Thank you, Roshni. Thank you. I think there is. Yeah. Thank you, Roshni. Thank you very much for a nice introduction. And first of all, my sincere apology for the delay because we were not used to this Zoom meetings. Most of our meetings usually happen in the WebEx and hold on. Yeah, most of the meeting happens in the WebEx, or it happens on the GoToMeeting. Is the audio quality good? I'm hearing feedback.
Sir, there is a feedback from your microphone. And we have two, I think you seem to have.
Yeah, because, just a minute, let me check here.
I'm unable to unmute you, sir. I can't hear you, sir. No, I can't hear you, sir. I think you've logged in two devices, sir. So I think you need to.
Yeah, the problem is I have is it better now?
Yeah, it's better now, sir.
Okay. Because I have a presentation in another lab. Something wrong.
No, sir, I can't hear you, sir.
Just 1 minute, Roshni, just troubleshooting.
You should log out of one system.
Is it better now?
Yeah, it is better now, sir.
Okay. Okay. The problem was, as I told you earlier, so we don't use the Zoom because of it's an unprotected version. So all our laptops are installed with uh, WebEx or GoToMeeting.com. So the problem is now my laptop is not able to configure the Zoom microphone, to access my microphone in the laptop. So that's why I'm using my mobile phone to talk to all of you. So what I will do is, in this case, then I will share a couple of slides to Roshni now by email. Okay, maybe you can project the slides from your laptop so that I can use my phone for lecturing. If that's okay, then I'll just share it with you right away.
Sure, sure, no problem.
So you can start because I want to show some very little slides for the audience to understand what we are talking about. Sorry for this technical glitch. This is just bear with me for a minute. I'm sending it to.
All right, sir.
Roshni, I'm sending you a link to you because it's a big file. Just go to that link. Okay.
Okay.
Just go to the YouTube link, and then you can start playing that my lecture there on ABI. But it's an elaborate lecture. Just play there whenever I say to pause it. Just
Just
pause
a
it.
moment, sir.
I will send you right away. Just a second, Roshni. I'm just sending you by WhatsApp.
You're sending it on where, sir?
Yeah, you will see it on your WhatsApp now. Yeah. Roshni, I think you must have received it now, the link.
Yeah, I received it. I received it, sir.
Okay, so what you can do is you can just share that on your screen, go to YouTube. In the meantime, I'll start talking to the audience. You can do it immediately.
Sure, sure. Just a moment, sir.
Okay. Yeah. You keep doing it. So you can start sharing it also. So let me start with the basic introduction to the audience now. You can forward it. Okay. You can pause it here. Okay, so very good morning to everyone. And Roshni, thank you very much for the nice introduction and organizing this wonderful webinar. I'm extremely sorry about this technical glitch what we had in the morning, because as I told you, like, we are not used to this Zoom due to the protection considerations. And however, I think we will go ahead with the talk now, and I really appreciate all of you for joining this meeting. And this is a very unique topic, and which is not been spoken in many of the public forums as well. We had a lot of discussions, meetings going on auditory brain-stem implant all over the world among the group of scientists and the clinicians working in this respective field. But when it comes to the orientation of the ABI to the general public, it doesn't happen in many places. And I thank Roshni for organizing such a wonderful meeting with a nice group of audience as well. So to begin with, I'm Ranjith Rajeswaran. I'm the Chief Audiologist of Madras Research Foundation and also the Principal of MERF Institute of Speech and Hearing in Chennai. And we established our institute in 1996, and almost for the last 24 years, we've been in the field of cochlear implants and auditory brain-stem implants. And we have performed more than 57 children with who received auditory brain-stem implant from our center. And today, our center is one of the biggest auditory brain-stem implant center in the world as of now. So, can you just move to the next slide, Roshni? Okay. Now, let me begin what's auditory brain-stem implant. So, auditory brain-stem implant is a biotechnological device which is very similar to cochlear implant. And Roshni, can you play it? And auditory brain, unlike cochlear implant, auditory brainstem implant is placed in the brainstem, not in the cochlea. And the difference between the auditory brainstem implant and the cochlear implant are a couple of things. One is the place of stimulation and the surgical procedure. Sorry, Roshi, can you just little fast forward it? You can go a little further down. Go further, go further, further. Yeah, stop there. Yes. Just go further. Can you forward it, Roshni? Can you go a little further away? Go further. Okay, fine. So just leave it there. Okay, as I told you, the difference between the cochlear implant and the brainstem implant is the place of stimulation. Now, if you look at the anatomy of the cochlea if you look at the anatomy of the ear has got three major components: the outer ear, middle ear, and the inner ear. Now, the inner ear is a very important structure where the signals are converted into electrical, the sound is converted into electrical signals, and these signals are taken through the auditory nerve to the brain. So, this is how the ear functions. Now, what happens is when the cochlea, the inner ear, which is affected, or ossified, or the absence of the inner ear, then you will not be able to do a cochlear implant. So, what exactly I mean is, if you look at the anatomy of the ear, now there are only two basic functions which the ear does. Now, the function number one, the ear is good in converting sound to electrical signal and good in transmitting the electrical signal to the brain. Okay. Now, the conversion of sound to an electrical signal happens in the cochlea, or we call it as an inner ear. The transmission of the electrical signal to the brain is carried over by the auditory nerve to the brain. Right. Now, most of the children, those who are born with congenital hearing loss, they have a problem in the cochlea, which means the cochlea is functionally impaired. Okay. When the cochlea is functionally impaired, what happens? The sound is not converted into electrical signal. Only if the sound is converted into electrical signal, then the sound can reach the brain can make some sense out of the sound. If the sound is not converted into electrical signal, then the signal is not going to, sound will not reach the brain. Now, there are some special cells in the inner ear, which is called the hair cells. Now, when the hair cells are not functioning, then the sound is not converted into electrical signal. This is point number one that you need to remember, right? Now, when the cells are not functioning, then what do we do? Depending on the percentage of cells which is functioning, you can plan the treatment. Okay, for example, if 50% of the cells are functioning, and the pay, just for you to understand, let's assume that 50% of the cell equals to 50% of hearing, or 50% of hearing loss. When the 50% of the cells are functioning, you have 50% of hearing function. The remaining 50% of the hearing function is lost. So what do we do in this case? We fit a hearing aid, right? Now, when more than 70% or 75% of the hair cells are not functioning, that means the hearing loss is above 75-80%. When the hearing loss is above 75-80%, you can wear a hearing aid, but the benefit that the child is, or the brain is going to extract from the hearing aid is very minimal for understanding speech. So what is the ultimate goal of any treatment? The ultimate goal of any treatment is to make the person more functional, as much functional as possible, right? So the ultimate goal of any treatment for deafness or hearing impairment is, number one, is to make them hear normal, number one, and to make use of the hearing and produce normal speech and language. This is the ultimate goal of the treatment for hearing loss. So they should be able to hear all the sound. They should be able to understand the conversation which is happening. They should be able to understand the environmental sounds and make meaning out of it. And later, they develop language and they're able to communicate orally, not using sign language. This is the ultimate goal of the treatment for hearing impairment. Right. Now, to achieve it, there are different ways of achieving it depending upon the type of hearing loss, the level of hearing loss, and the site of hearing loss. Okay, the site means what exactly, where exactly is the problem, how much problem. So if you know the level of problem and where exactly the problem, then you will be able to give an appropriate treatment to overcome this problem and make this particular child normal. Normal in the sense the child should be able to hear normal and speak normal. That's the ultimate goal, right? And after speaking normal, the child will go to normal school, mainstreaming, becoming one among the other normal kids. So that's the ultimate goal. To achieve it, first we need to understand where exactly is the problem, right? Now, let's go back to the first example. So when there is a 50% of hearing loss, then you put a hearing aid. And with hearing aid, you measure the hearing level, you measure the speech perception level. If the speech perception is very good, then you fit with the hearing aid and make the page and train the child to learn to listen, learn language, and finally to communicate orally. Right. If the hearing loss is more than 75% across frequencies, right, which means the benefit that you get from the hearing aid is not as good as the benefit that you get with the normal hearing, which means even with the hearing aid, the child only will have a compromised hearing, which will only produce a compromised speech. So the question is whether you want a compromised speech or whether you want the child to speak like anyone of us, normal speech. Now, if you need the child to produce normal speech, you need to give a very good hearing, near normal hearing. If the benefit from the hearing aid itself is less, then the speech production will also be limited. Right. So this is something which all the parents should understand. So number first point, I'll reiterate, the hair cells and the amount of sound that is converted into electrical signal is number one. Number two, the benefit that you get with the hearing aid really reflects the language and speech outcome. Now, let's go back to the first example. So if the hearing loss is above 70-80%, when the hearing aid is not giving adequate benefit, produce normal language and speech. So what option we have? The option what we have is a cochlear implant. Now, what you do is, when you put a cochlear implant, the cochlear implant will convert the sound into electrical signals and deliver the signals to the auditory nerve directly, bypassing the cells. So the hair cells function is to convert the sound into electrical signal. Because the hair cell is not functioning, you put another device which will do the function of the hair cell or which will replace the function of the hair cell and deliver the sound in the electrical form to the auditory nerve. And this device is a cochlear implant. And we all know about cochlear implant. In the past, a lot of us have spoken about cochlear implant. I'm sure this group is aware of the cochlear implant. Now, with the cochlear implant and with appropriate training, the child will be able to listen to sounds and will be able to understand, learn language and speech. Right. Now, somebody has texted in the group that they can't see the PowerPoint, so I'll just repeat once again. There was a technical problem with using the Zoom in our laptop, so I'm unable to project my PowerPoint through this presentation. But however, what I will do is I have shared my YouTube link for this presentation on ABI. I think Roshni has got the link. Roshni, you can forward the link to the participants so that they can go and view it whenever they would like to see, whenever they have time. So I hope that's okay with you, Roshni. You can share it with them. Can you all hear me? I'm not getting any feedback. Roshni, am I audible? Everything is clear?
Can you hear me now, sir?
I can hear you now, yes. Okay. Okay, great. So now, as I told you, the cochlear implant will replace the functioning of the hair cell. Okay, this is a very general term. So don't think that it is exactly replacing the functioning of the hair cell. It is actually replacing the one of the major function of the hair cell. The major function of the hair cell is to convert the sound into electrical signal. Because the hair cell is not functioning, you put an electrode inside. The electrode delivers the acoustic sound into electrical signals to the auditory nerve. The nerve takes the information to the brain. Right. Now, this is one of the very successful solution for children with hearing loss of more than 80%, who has very limited benefit from the hearing aid, right? And this has been quite successful. A lot of children, millions of children all over the world have received cochlear implant and doing very well now. Now, what is a brainstem implant? What is the role of the brainstem implant? Now, before we understand the brainstem implant, let me tell you why we need a brainstem implant. Why we need a brainstem implant. Number one is, I told you earlier, now when the hair cell is not functioning, okay, you can put a cochlear implant. The cochlear implant will deliver the signal to the auditory nerve, and the auditory nerve, the nerve which is responsible for hearing, will take the information to the brain. Only if the sound reaches the brain will make some sense out of it. Now, imagine a situation where the auditory nerve itself is not there. The auditory nerve is not there. What will happen? Even if you put a cochlear implant, the signal will not reach the brain, because there is no nerve to take the signal to the brain. So the link between the ear, the inner ear, which is the cochlea, and the brain is disconnected because of no nerve. The nerve is not there, so the link is not complete. So what do we do in this situation? So in this situation, okay, you put a device bypassing the auditory nerve, bypassing the cochlea, and you put the device directly on the brainstem, right? Instead of placing the device in the cochlea, you place the device directly on the auditory brainstem, bypassing the auditory nerve, right? This is one indication. Another indication is when the cochlea is present, the cochlea is there, but it is not developed. Now imagine if you have to put a cochlear implant, the cochlea has to be developed. If the cochlea is not developed normally, you can't put a cochlear implant inside. So in a patient or a child where the cochlea is not developed, to put a cochlear implant, then you have to do a brainstem implant. Right? Now, I want all of you to to pay attention to this particular point, which I'm going to tell now. When I mean the cochlea is not developed, there are two things. One, cochlea is absent. It is not developed completely. There is no cochlea. The second thing, the cochlea is underdeveloped. The cochlea is there, but it is not developed properly. There are two conditions. Cochlea is absent and cochlea is underdeveloped. These are two conditions. Now, when cochlea is underdeveloped, then there is a possibility that you can put a cochlear implant. Right. When cochlea is absent, you can't put a cochlear implant. Clear? So, when the cochlea is underdeveloped is one important terminology. Cochlea is absent is another different terminology. Don't confuse. Okay. Now, in an underdeveloped cochlea, the surgeon and the audiologist, they will be able to figure out whether the cochlear implant can be inserted into this cochlea or not. If so, what type of electrode has to be used will also be decided by them. So this is why we need to have an implant which has got different options for the electrodes. For example, you have an electrode which is 30 millimeter length, 28 millimeter length, 19 millimeter length, 16 millimeter length, and you have an electrode which can be customized to your cochlea. You can have an electrode which is called the split electrode, short electrode. There are different types of electrodes available. I think earlier in my presentation about different types of electrodes, I think I've shared the slides about different types of electrodes. Roshni must be having that. Yeah. So the point what I'm trying to tell you here is, in an underdeveloped cochlea, keep this in mind, in an underdeveloped cochlea, or technically we call it as cochlear anomaly or anomalous cochlea, okay, there is a possibility of doing a cochlear implant. Only if the cochlea development is so poor, the anomaly is so bad, where the surgeon and the audiologist decide there is no way of putting a cochlear implant inside, then you should go for a brainstem implant. Okay. Now, let me give a little more clarity on what I'm trying to tell you. When cochlea is absent, where you can't put a cochlear implant, brainstem implant is the only choice. Right? When the nerve is completely absent, when there is no nerve, then brainstem implant is the only choice. Right? Now, these are the definite indications for brainstem implant. The probable indications for brainstem implant is when the cochlea is poorly developed, the cochlea is anomalous, okay, or the cochlea is underdeveloped. If your surgeon and the audiologist feel that it is not possible to put a cochlear implant, then you need to go for a brainstem implant. If they can insert a cochlear implant electrode in this anomalous cochlea, then the first choice should be the cochlear implant, not the brainstem implant. Clear? So whenever you go to a doctor, definitely your surgeon or will be asking you to take a radiological imaging, which will give you the status of the cochlea and the nerve. When the cochlea is absolutely normal and the nerve is also absolutely normal, cochlear implant is the first choice. When the cochlea is normal and the nerve is absent, nerve is missing, then brainstem implant is the only choice. Right? When the cochlea is underdeveloped or poorly developed or anomalous, then the call is on the type of anomaly. So based on the type of anomaly, your surgeon and the audiologist will be able to decide whether cochlear implant is possible or whether the cochlear implant is not possible. Even if they decide a cochlear implant, it depends on what type of electrode is suitable to give the maximum benefit for this particular child. Right? So if they decide cochlear implant is not possible, then the brainstem implant is a choice. If there is at least a 10% chance of putting a cochlear implant inside, then the first choice should be the cochlear implant, not the brainstem. Yes, Roshni, you want to ask me something?
Ranjit sir, as you were saying, if the cochlear is underdeveloped or it's enormous or it's absent, then we go only for brainstem. But when we think about the cochlear nerve, even if it is very thin, is it possible for CI?
That's what that's my next thing what I want to tell, because I want to go one step at a time for the audience to understand, because I don't want them to confuse between the nerve and the cochlea. Right? So this is with respect to the cochlea. Whatever I've told now is only with respect to the cochlea. Okay. Now imagine another situation. What I told you, there are two things which is important for a cochlear implant. Number one, the cochlea should be developed normal, though it is not functioning normal. The nerve should be present. right? Now, when I mean the nerve should be present, the nerve should be present. See, there is a normal size of the nerve. So, based on the size and thickness of the nerve, we predict the normal anatomy of the nerve. For example, I'm trying to explain everything in a very simple, non-scientific way so that the people will understand. So, scientifically, we have different terminologies to explain, which may not make sense to some of the audiences who are not in the with the scientific background. So, the normalcy of the nerve is determined based on the size or the thickness that can be measured by when you do a scan, right? Now, when that particular size of the nerve is thin, okay, or reduced, okay, then we call it as a hypoplastic nerve or an underdeveloped nerve or a thin nerve. You understand? So when somebody says it's a thin nerve or hypoplastic nerve, what does it mean? It means the size of the nerve is small. So how do you determine whether the nerve is developed normally or abnormal development? You can only measure based on the size, right? So when the thickness of the nerve is reduced compared to the normal thickness, we call it as a hypoplastic, or we call it as underdeveloped or a thin nerve, right? Now you all understood what thin nerve is. Now imagine there is a possibility where a particular child may have a normal cochlea, normally developed cochlea, not an anomalous cochlea, not underdeveloped cochlea, normal cochlea, but the child can have a thin nerve. That is also possible. Now, what do we do in this case? Right, number one, if you can see a nerve, even though it is thin, okay, then cochlear implant is the first choice. You have a normal cochlea and a thin nerve, the cochlear implant is the first choice, right? You have a normal cochlea and a no nerve, then brainstem implant is the only choice, right? Now, the next question is, now when you say thin nerve, okay, now how sure are we that the nerve is thin? Or how sure are we when you put a cochlear implant in a thin nerve, the patient will get benefit? That's the next important question that comes to the parent's mind. Now, nobody is sure of it. So even me, I'm not very sure of it. That's the honest answer. If somebody says that I'm very sure in the thin nerve, with cochlear implant, the patient will benefit, I think that's absolute stupidity. Because the fact is, it is not the presence of the nerve. It is not the presence of the nerve, whether it's thin or thick. It is how the nerve is conducting the information that matters a lot to really to predict the outcome, right? If the nerve is conducting the signals like uh, what it is supposed to be, then the outcomes are good. If the nerve is conducting the signal in an anomalous way, in an abnormal way, then the outcomes will also vary. You understand this point? So the optimal prediction is when a patient has a thin nerve, we can say, yes, with the cochlear implant, the child will be able to hear. That's number one. Number two, but the quality of the sound uh, is variable, right? The quality of the sound is variable. So can you quantify the quality, or can you measure the quality? It is not possible now unless we implant the child and monitor the child for 3 months. It's very difficult for us to predict the quality. So prior to the surgery, okay, it is very, very difficult to predict the quality of the sound, what the child is going to hear with the cochlear implant with respect to a thin nerve. Okay, but what is definitely possible to tell is, yes, the nerve is thin. However, with the cochlear implant, the child will be able to hear. That is possible to tell. Understand? There are two things: hearing and hearing a good quality of sound. Right. So that is definitely possible to tell. Right. Now, there is a condition where we have decided, though the nerve is very thin, then you would have still recommended to go for a brainstem implant. Okay, so that decision is made case by case. There is no general rule. There is no absolute carpet rule, right? You can decide case by case, okay, whether this child will benefit with a cochlear implant or not, in spite of having a thin nerve. Okay. Now, how do you decide that? The next question is, Ranjit, on what basis you will decide whether this child, even in spite of thin nerve, the child will need a brain stem? On what basis you decide? Yes. So, as I told you earlier, we will evaluate the functioning of the nerve. Now, we have a lab in our institute where we can test the functioning of the nerve, okay, much before doing a cochlear implant. Okay, you have different tests to do it. Okay, now based on the results from the test, it will give us some information to predict whether this child will benefit with a cochlear implant or not, in spite of the nerve being thin. Okay, so based on those findings and also correlating with the radiological responses, the surgeon and the audiologist can decide on a case-by-case basis whether this child needs a brainstem implant in spite of having a thin nerve. Okay, otherwise the general rule is whenever you have the nerve and the cochlea, okay, then cochlear implant is the first choice. That's a general rule, right? Right. So this is how you need to decide whether the patient needs a brainstem implant or the patient needs a cochlear implant. I think this is one of the most important information the parent should know, right? So there are a lot of things that you can talk about brainstem implant, right? With respect to the mapping, with respect to the outcomes, with respect to the management, right? Now, that's a huge topic to discuss. But to put it in a nutshell, let me explain in the next 5 to 10 minutes how we go about with the cochlear implant, with the brainstem implant. Right. Now, once we decide this child needs a brainstem implant, we have certain protocols. Right. The child has to go through those protocols. For example, the child will have to get an opinion from different specialists, the cardiologist, the ophthalmologist, the pediatrician. We also get assessment by the speech language pathologist, the detailed audiological evaluations, and also the child's IQ level is also being measured. So after doing all this, and most importantly, we also get opinion from the pediatric anesthetist who is experienced in the brainstem implant. So once everybody clears, yes, the child is a candidate for a BVI, the child is suitable to undergo the surgery, then we take up the child for surgery. Right? And the surgery will last for an average period of 4 hours. Okay. Now, and an average is 4 hours, but it can vary. It can vary from somewhere between 2.5 hours, and it can even go up to 6.5, 7 hours. But the average time period is 4 hours to 4.5 hours. That's the average time. Now, during the surgery, there are a few challenges. The challenge number one is identifying the right place in the brainstem, because in a cochlear implant, you have to put the electrode in the cochlea. Once you put the electrode in the cochlea properly, the child will be able to hear, because the nerve cells are in the cochlea. It will take the information to the brain. But the brainstem implant is little more complex. The brain stem itself is a little more complex compared to cochlea. So when you put an electrode in the brain stem, you need to be very, very careful, and you need to be highly experienced and skilled. Okay. So both the surgeon and the audiologist play a major role in placing the electrode on the brainstem, right? Now, one of the biggest challenge in the brainstem implant is The place where we keep the electrode in the brainstem is called the cochlear nucleus. Like how you place it in the how you place the cochlear implant in the cochlea, you place the brainstem implant on the cochlear nucleus, which is housed in the brainstem. Okay, the access to the cochlear nucleus is little complex, and identifying the cochlear nucleus is little challenging. On top of it, the development of the cochlear nucleus itself is sometimes questionable. Right. So, is there a way to assess or predict or identify the development of the cochlear nucleus? There is no foolproof way to do it as of now with the present technology in the world. Right. There are other ways of predicting it, and it is predicted based on anatomical landmarks and all those things, which the surgeon will take care of it. So, once you place the electrode on the cochlear nucleus, then the surgeon will close it. The surgery is over. The audiologist will test, actually, will tell whether the electrode is on the cochlear nucleus. And once the things are all confirmed with the best possible placement, then the surgeon will close it. And the patient is under care for some time. Then we do the switch on. Okay. Now the switch on is very, very complex, because when you stimulate a cochlear implant in a patient who received a cochlear implant, the child will hear sound. But in a brainstem implant, the child will hear sound. The child will also have stimulation of other areas in the body, because the brainstem, the cochlear nucleus, is close to other functions of the body. The nucleuses or the cells or the nerves which are responsible for other functions of the body are also in very close proximity to this cochlear nucleus in the brainstem. So the signal, the electrical signal that has been delivered by the electrode can also stimulate the other areas which is not responsible for hearing, and the child may experience some other sensation, what is called as non-auditory sensations. Right. So this is very important, because the skill of the audiologist, the experience of the audiologist, okay, so they will be able to identify this, and they will be able to tackle this and optimize the current stimulation so that the children doesn't get that particular effect on them. Right. So there are two possibilities. The child can hear sound. The child can also hear non-auditory sensations, which can be controlled. So in general, a lot of parents will panic about it. Oh, there will be a non-auditory sensation. The child will get paralyzed. The child will not be able to faint. The child may die. It can do all those things. Everything is possible, but everything is controllable. That is what I'm trying to tell you. Okay, so it can be controlled. It can be managed easily. Okay, that depends on the skill of the audiologist and the experience of the audiologist who's working with a particular child. Right. So that's very important. So that is why it's always important to go in an experienced hand. Okay. So my point here is, don't worry about non-auditory sensation. It is manageable. Okay. Then after we do the switch on, once the child starts receiving the inputs using the brainstem implant device, then we have to start the therapy, the rehabilitation or auditory rehabilitation. Right. Now, the auditory rehabilitation has to be very intense. Right? Now, the auditory rehabilitation has to be for a minimum period of 2 years. And during this process, the development of the child will be monitored. And the mapping has to be done frequently. Optimizing the sound has to be done more frequently compared to a cochlear implant. Right? Because every behavior of the child gives a lot of information for the audiologist to program the device. And it is very, very important to program the device. And it is highly, what do you call it, as complicated in programming. So the experience matters a lot. And the most important point that I would like to highlight is, never expect your child development to be as good as cochlear implant is. Because The outcomes with brainstem implant is definitely comparably less compared to the benefits that the child gets with the cochlear implant. The children with brainstem implant will not do as good as a cochlear implant children, and on average. But there are exceptionals. There are a lot of exceptionals, right? Some brainstem implant children, they perform as good as cochlear implantees, or even as good as normal hearing subjects, right? So, but there may be some limitations, because when I say very good, there are different domains to the language. There are different domains to speech. There are different domains in communication, right? So they may be doing as good as cochlear implantees and as good as normal hearing children in most of the domains, but they may be lacking in some of the domains. Because let's not forget, we are using an artificial device, and we are bypassing the preliminary function of the ear, and we are directly delivering the information to the brainstem. So that impact will always be there in the outcome with respect to the quality of speech and the quality of sounds, right? So what I would say is, never expect a brainstem implant child to have normal language and normal speech. Don't go with that expectation, because on an average, it will not happen. This is truth. Now, what can you expect? Yes, I will tell you what you should expect when you go for a brainstem implant. Number one is, don't expect anything. Don't expect anything when you go for a brainstem implant, because nobody knew. And because nobody can give you, nobody can predict what to expect. So don't expect anything. Okay? But realistically, there is a possibility your child can hear. There is a 50% chance your child can hear. There's again a 50% chance your child may not be able to hear even with the brainstem implant. Right? Now, even if your child hears, the child may not be able to comprehend as good as a cochlear implant. Okay. Even if your child comprehends as good as a cochlear implant, the child may not be able to produce speech as good as a cochlear implant. Okay. If your child produces speech as good as a cochlear implant, that's the ultimate. That is 100%. Okay. But I'm not demotivating the parents here. I'm only asking the parents to be very realistic in the expectations, right? The point is, the development of language and speech in a child with the brainstem implant is very, very slow. This is, now I'm going to speak based on my experience with this brainstem implantees, especially in children, which we've been experienced for the last 11 years, and we have done 57 children so far. So based on our experience, the development of language and speech is very slow, but it develops in brainstem implant. The quantity, I mean, this is for a general public to understand. I'm using this term quantity. Now, the quantity of speech that a child with cochlear implant who is implanted by the age of 2 years, okay, the quantity that a 2-year-old, a child who received a cochlear implant at the age of 2 years, okay. Now, if you measure the quantity of speech development by 12 months, whatever this child achieves in 12 months, okay, the same with a brainstem implant who received an implant by the age of 2 years, the same quantity the child may achieve it, okay, in 30 months or 36 months, in 3 years. Right? So the development is very slow. That is what we have observed from our findings. Okay, but the development is there. So development is there, but the development is very slow. This is something which you need to keep in mind. The reason is, you may see a lot of cochlear implantees who's doing very well by the age of 12th month, but the brainstem implantee would not have reached that level. He might have not even reached the half of it. Okay, so Parents shouldn't feel bad or parents shouldn't feel demotivated, because in the normal process of development of speech and language in the brainstem implant itself is slow. Okay, so that you need to accept it and you need to keep working with them, right? So we have seen children those who have performed very well by 12 months. We've also had patients who are performing very slowly and has performed and has achieved only by 5 years after. Okay, after 5 years. So it is quite variable from subject to subject. It is very difficult to tell. But the point is they develop. Right. Number one. Number two is there is so much of effort that the family has to put in a brainstem implant. The audiologist has to put in, the surgeon has to put in, the rehabilitationist, the speech language therapist, the physical therapist, the occupational therapist. Everybody has to put in a lot of efforts in the brainstem implant. And they should be very patient and they should consistently work, and they work more and more and more as the time goes on, okay, to achieve good benefits. And finally, whatever the child has achieved, okay, let's look at in the scale of 0 to 10, 10 being the maximum score achieved by a cochlear implantee or a normal hearing subject. Okay, now in a brainstem implant child, this child, after putting lot of efforts working with the child for 2 years or 3 years, let's assume this child has only achieved 5 in the scale of 0 to 10, 10 being maximum. Assume the child has only achieved the score of 5, which means it is not bad. For that particular child, that is the maximum that can be achieved. Right? That is 100% for that individual patient, for that individual child. Okay. So you have to see the child individualistic, not as a general. You can't compare with others. So which means what I'm trying to tell you is, with the brainstem implant, you cannot compare the outcome with cochlear implantees or normal hearing subjects. Okay. Whatever is the maximum benefit that we can achieve with that particular child is 100% to the child. Right? Without brainstem implant, you wouldn't have even achieved that. Okay. So if you ask me, will my child get 100% benefit with cochlear implant? I will not say no. Sorry, I'm sorry. I will say no. I will say no. If someone asks me whether my child will get 100% benefit with cochlear implant as with a brainstem implant, I will definitely say no. Your child may not get 100% benefit. But whatever benefit your child gets is the 100% for that particular child. Right? So you cannot compare apple and orange. Every child is different. You can't compare the cochlear implant with the brainstem implant, and you can't even compare two brainstem implantees. Right? Now, let's assume, look, that brainstem implantee has achieved 100%. Let's say he's achieved a score of 8 in the scale of 10. Will my child also achieve score of 8? No, we don't know. The child might achieve 7, a child might achieve 2, or your child may even achieve 10. We don't know unless we start working with your child. So expectations, keep it open. That's the realistic expectation, and start working on it rather than expecting something great. We will achieve it, and whatever we achieve is a maximum that we could achieve with the child. Okay. On the contrary, if you haven't provided a brainstem implant to this child, okay, you're missing out even this chance. You're depriving the child from getting even that 30% benefit or a 50% benefit or a 60% benefit. Okay, that chance is even lost. Right. So if someone wants are a little wavering whether to decide whether to go for a brainstem implant or not to go for a brainstem implant, I would only give this advice. It's a question of the chance. If you want to give a chance to your child, it's a 50-50 chance. There's a 50% chance your child will benefit. There is a 50% chance your child will not benefit. But if you're willing to give the chance to the child to see whether the child, an opportunity to the child, Let's give an opportunity to the child. Okay, then go ahead with the brainstem implant. If you think that no, I'm expecting only 100% benefit, then I would not advise you to go for a brainstem implant because nobody knows. Your child may achieve it. Your child may achieve 100%, but it's difficult to predict before the surgery, not before the treatment, right? So that's my advice to the parents. Now, from our experience, I would say 25% of our children are doing very, very well with brainstem. Very well. Another 60% of the patients are doing moderately well with brainstem. They're doing reasonably well with brainstem. There's always a 5% of the patient. Those who are not getting much benefit with the brainstem implant, they do very poorly with brainstem implant. So we have a mix of outcomes. Right? So most likely, your child may fall within the moderate category. If we are lucky, the child may fall within the top 25% category where they do extremely very well. Right? And if we are very unlucky, then the child may fall within that 5% category where the performance is very poor. Right? So all those things we may not know unless we start working with the child. Right? Now, this is how you need to go ahead with the ABI. But if you need further informations, detailed informations, we can discuss on a case-by-case basis. Right? Now, I don't mind talking to the people, those who are interested. Personally, I can talk. If they don't want to discuss in public, they can also contact me in person. So Roshni has my contacts and you can get in touch with me. And we will certainly help you in decision-making process. Right. So if you have any, and this is exactly what I wanted to tell all of you today. Yes. This is exactly what I want you to understand as well. So we can keep talking about brainstem implant. I can talk about brainstem implant for continuously for 8 hours. That's not a problem. But there's so much of science to it. There's so much of information to it. But as a parent, what you need to understand is you need to understand basically what is a brainstem implant. What is the difference between a brainstem implant and a cochlear implant? Okay. Who is a candidate for a brainstem implant? What are the indications for the brainstem implant? What will be the probable outcome? What I can expect? And how to make decisions. Right. So I think I've covered all these things in a very nutshell, in a very colloquial way. So if you have any questions now, you may please ask me. So Roshni can facilitate. I think Roshni, if they have doubts, either you can speak for them or you can unmute their mic, they can ask. Now it's open.
Well, you've actually really nicely explained about brainstem implants, and thank you so much. I have really been waiting to understand this because it's only now that I know why it is very very rare, and I don't find much about brainstem implant online as well. And now I understand why people are asking whether it is uh, dangerous and why it is not the first choice and cochlear is only the first choice. Why not brainstem? But thanks to your explanation, now I completely understand because someone just asked a question actually in between as to why the brainstem implant is not the first choice. Is it dangerous? And I think you had already answered it by saying there is a uh, you have to install the electrodes directly to the
Yeah.
cochlear.
Roshni, I think it is nothing to do danger or not dangerous. Nothing is dangerous. Nothing is dangerous because, or rather, I would say everything is dangerous. Even, cutting your nail is also dangerous. If you don't do it properly, you may hurt your fingers. So danger is in everything what you do, but it doesn't stop us from doing things, right? So you really need to know what is the risk and the benefit, right? Which is handling you is capable enough to handle the risk. Risk is always there in all surgeries, right? It is the experience of the team, the knowledge of the team, the size of the team, and the quality of the team. So this is what is important in a brainstem implant program. So we also had patients with complications, but it is managed. right? So complications will always come, but you need to know whether it can be managed or not. So you need to go to a team which has got a good experience, and they will be able to manage it. This is the general rule of any medical treatment, not only for a brainstem implant, right? Now, don't be afraid. Nothing is dangerous here. The reason why we um, um, the reason why we tell the brainstem implant is not the first choice of treatment for a patient with a thin nerve or with anomalous cochlea is simply because we compared the outcomes, okay, of patients with anomalous cochlea and thin nerve compared with brainstem implantees. Okay, so the outcome is, I would say, there is not much of a difference on an average, but except for a case-by-case difference in the outcomes, right? You can provide a cochlear implant and can still achieve a very similar level of outcome that you achieve with the brainstem implant. Then why do a brainstem implant is the point? Because cochlear implant is much cheaper. Cochlear implant is much easier. It's not so complex compared to a brainstem implant. It's not a big procedure compared to a brainstem implant. So cochlear implant is less complex compared to a brainstem implant. That's what I'm trying to tell. And it is not a big procedure compared to a brainstem implant. So the first choice of treatment should always be a very simplest procedure if it is possible, right? So compared to brainstem implant, cochlear implant is a very simple procedure, right? But however, it varies from surgeon to surgeon, but definitely it's so when there is a possibility of doing a cochlear implant, and if you can achieve benefits out of it, then you don't need to do a brainstem implant. That is why the cochlear implant should be the first choice of treatment. Okay, in case if it is possible to do. If you can't do a cochlear implant, okay, then there is no choice. You have to do only the brainstem implant. That's why it is we say the first choice is a cochlear implant if it's possible to do. See, you
Right.
can't do a cochlear implant for a patient with absent nerve. Okay, you can't do a cochlear implant for a patient with absent cochlea. You can't do a cochlear implant for a patient where the cochlea is completely ossified, where it's difficult to put a cochlear implant inside, electrode inside. You can't do a cochlear implant even in a patient with a very thin nerve where the surgeon and the audiologist feels that the nerve is not going to give any benefit even if you put a cochlear implant. So in that case, you can't do a cochlear implant. You can only do a brainstem.
So, if you can, if possible, has there been a case where the child has on one side a cochlear implant and on one side a brainstem implant, and how has the child's hearing development been?
Yeah, see, we haven't done any patient with a cochlear implant on one side and the brainstem implant on the other side. We haven't done that. And there are only one or two cases reported all over the world as of now, which is, I think, one case done in Turkey or Italy, I believe, if I'm not wrong. But there have been cases where who has received a cochlear implant and they have not got any benefit, then they received a brainstem implant. That is possible. But there are quite a few patients who has undergone. So you put a cochlear implant and the benefit is very poor with the cochlear implant. Then we have did the brainstem implant on those. So that is there. But having cochlear implant on one side, having a brainstem implant on the other side, I think it is reported only one or two patients reported all over the world. But my opinion is, when do we decide a cochlear implant on one side and the brainstem implant on the other side? For example, a child has got bilateral anomaly. That is, in one ear there is a thin nerve. Okay, on the other ear there is no nerve. Okay, and even in the other ear it's a very thin nerve, very similar to this. Now we go with the cochlear implant. As I told you, cochlear implant is the first choice. You put a cochlear implant. Okay, and the child is not benefiting very well. Okay, then the family and the surgeon and the audiologist decide, yes, we need to do a brainstem implant for the child because a cochlear implant is not giving adequate benefit. Then the question is, okay, whether to remove the cochlear implant and put a brainstem implant on the side, or let's leave the cochlear implant, why disturb it? Let's put a new brainstem implant on the opposite side. Right. That's the decision to be taken on a case by case basis. So I think those are the conditions where the child may have a cochlear implant on one side and the brainstem implant on the other side. Now, definitely, your question, to answer your question, how the sound will be, it's definitely not going to be as good as normal hearing. Okay, but it's very individualistic. Okay, so whatever is the maximum the child is going to get, that's the maximum for the child. Whatever the child is getting with the best of the efforts from the audiologist, surgeon, and the family, that's the maximum the child is going to get.
So Ranjit sir, as you were saying that when it comes to brainstem implant, the development is very slow. We cannot have that expectations and things. But I think for those who have already gone through the brainstem implant and they're still struggling, so can we say that for them, for those children who are already there, and they look at the others who are for progress and doing very well with cochlear implant, they feel very feel backed up. So can we say that we can motivate them by saying they can focus on their listening skills?
Yeah, see, the training is an ongoing process. Training is, of course, an ongoing process, right? Now, I think the parents are also working on the listening skills and knowledge, but you have to understand the child has a problem, okay? And the child has a problem, and the child can only achieve to a certain level, right? Now, training is an adequate part of, training is a very significant part of the whole process. So you have to keep two things in mind. One, we need to work, and work. Okay, the child will develop. Don't blame the child for developing slow, or don't blame the child for not developing, or don't blame the procedure for not developing. Because we know, as I told you, whatever is the maximum, whatever is the child maximum that you could achieve with the child, that's 100% for the child. Right? Now, and I also told you, don't compare your child with others, because when you start comparing, there is no end to it. There's no end to it. Right. Now, what you should do is, you had your child before the implant and the child after the implant. Compare only these two things. If the child after implant is doing better than your own child before implant, okay, and that's the benefit. And whatever you achieve, that is the benefit. Right? You have to compare your own child prior to the implant and after the implant from time to time. Right? So that's the way to compare. But you shouldn't compare your child with other brainstem implanting. You should never compare your child with other cochlear implantees or with anybody else. Compare your own child before surgery and after surgery. If the child has made 10% of progress, that's good. If the child has made 90% of progress, is also good. But the child has made a progress. That's the way to compare.
Right. But sir, in terms of performance, as you're saying, I'm just being honest here, but it sounds like the performance is like as though we are hearing with hearing aids, because
Sorry,
the
I didn't get your question.
sir, the thing is, when you are explaining about performance and we cannot expect anything, is it as good as saying that we are not going to be hearing so great like in hearing aids?
No, we can't say anything about it.
Okay.
So we can't say anything. So look, what we see, to be very honest, what we hear, okay, based on your hearing level, you judge the quality of hearing. So the quality of judging the quality of sound is as good as the quality of the sound what you hear, right? Or as good as the quality of the hearing mechanism. Right? You have you listen to a music, okay, in a small, very small radio, okay, which is not a sophisticated system, and you listen to your music to a very good, most sophisticated radio. Okay, now there is a difference in the quality, correct? Now you will be able to appreciate this quality, okay, only if your auditory system can process this difference in the quality, correct? When your auditory system cannot process this difference, okay, then you won't be able to appreciate the quality in spite of you having the normal hearing. Understand the point? So the hearing is not that simple to explain. Hearing is different, processing the hearing is different, and that is when hearing is different and processing the sound is different. Okay, so if I have to make it even more simpler, sensing the sound is different, detecting the sound is different, processing the sound is different, understanding the sound is different, and making sense out of the sound is different, right? There are different levels of processing in the ear, right? If one processing is not good, then the whole, I mean, the final perception of the sound or the impression of the sound, it will also be affected, right? So that's what it is. So there are so much of process involved in it. Now, this process, okay, is out of control. All that what a cochlear implant or the brainstem implant provides is a sense of sound. How the auditory system is processing the sound, that's different. Okay, but whatever possible changes that we could make to make the auditory system process better, we will do it here. But there is a limitation to it, beyond which we can't do it. The system has to take over. So that is why, even in a children with a cochlear implant, you will see differences among them. Not all the cochlear implanted children perform at the same level. Okay. The scale that you may use to measure may differ. See, for example, you have a scale, okay, which can only measure 1 meter, 2 meter. It's only a meter scale. It can only measure in meters. If it cannot measure millimeters, okay. Now, if the scale only has 1 meter, 2 meter, 3 meter, 4 meter, okay, and you will, anybody who falls within between 1.5 meter and 2 meter, either the scale will calculate it as 2 meters, right? Imagine you have a weighing machine, okay? The weighing machine is programmed only to show absolute scales. That is, absolute scale is 1 kilogram, 2 kilogram, 3 kilogram, 4 kilogram, okay? So either it will show 1 kilogram or it will show only 2 kilogram. It is not going to show you 1.2 kilograms, right? So likewise, very similarly, if the measurement scale that you use to measure the language outcome and the speech outcome, if it is a broader scale, you will only be able to see most of the children performing equal. But if you go on a finer scale of measurement, you will see the difference among these kids. Clear? So one child may weigh 1 kilogram, another child may weigh 1 kilogram and 100 grams, right? So that difference, you will, I mean, that this is an example to show you the way of measuring it. Similarly, the quality of language and speech can be measured with the, can only be assessed using a finer scale. So if you look at the finer scales, you will see a difference. There are different domains to it. Look at it, right? And another example, you take a child who is implanted by the age of 1 year, and I mean a cochlear implant. Okay? A child who received a cochlear implant at the age of 1 year, and a child who received a cochlear implant by the age of 2 years. Definitely there is a difference. The implant is the same, the surgeon is the same, the audiologist is the same, the habilitation is the same. So why there is a difference? Because the processing is different. The earlier you do, the processing is better. Okay, the way the brain and the auditory system processes better, right? So that plays a major role in the quality of outcome. So that is not quantifiable, right? So we all know earlier is better because processing is good. We know that. Okay, so that much we know. But how good? We'll have to wait and see.
Sir, now if supposing anybody needs to go for brainstem implant, just in case that might be the last option. So what is the expense that would be that parents have to keep in mind when it comes to brainstem, so that they can be mentally prepared? If you could.
Now, see, the brainstem implant cost varies between the cost of the implant alone is very high. It's around 12 lakhs or around 12.5 or 13 lakhs, around that price, and some latest technologies would cost around 13 or 14 lakhs. So the price of the brainstem implant is equal to the cost of the expensive cochlear implant. Okay, there are cochlear implant which cost from 5 lakhs, and it can also cost up to 15 lakhs. The prices vary, right? So the price of the brainstem implant is around 12 to 15 lakhs rupees. So that's as good as an expensive cochlear implant. That's the cost of the device.
So, for the brainstem implant, like now, for when you actually explained to us about the difference between cochlear implant and brainstem implant, but in the case of brainstem implant, are we wearing any device outside?
Of course, yes. The brainstem, the only difference between a cochlear implant device and the brainstem implant device is the shape of the electrode and where we place the electrode. That's the only difference. The rest all is the same. If you don't mind, can you play that video which I sent you?
Sure.
Now I will show you the difference to you. I think that video has some image which has the.
How far should I go, sir?
Yeah, I'm just opening the video so that I can show you exactly. Just give me a second. Okay, just go 1 minute and 11 seconds. Just cue to 1 minute and 11 seconds. You have an image. One minute. I think you're in the 7 minutes zone. So just reduce. Just move your cursor to your left side. Just move your cursor to your left side, Roshni.
1 minute. In the first 1 minute.
1
Yeah.
minute. Yeah, first 1 minute. Yeah.
Oh.
Oh, yeah. Just move to your left. Yeah. Yeah. Just move. Just keep watching for 1 minute and 11 seconds. Just go back. Or you just leave it this place. Leave it this slide. Yeah. Leave it this slide. I'll explain even in this slide. Not a problem. Okay. Just a moment. Okay. So if you look at this slide, okay. Now that's the cochlea. What you see there is a cochlea. Okay. Now, and what you see inside the cochlea is a cochlear implant. That's how the cochlear implant is placed inside the cochlea. Now, if you look at the the brainstem implant is placed at the level of, can you see the auditory nerve which goes from the cochlea on your right side? Can you move your cursor on your right side? Yeah. Otherwise, let me just give me a second. Let me see if I can open it.
This is the place, sir?
Yeah, in this, see you see a cochlea on your left side, left top picture. You see the blue color cochlea. That's a cochlear implant. That's a cochlea. Um, and you see there's something called Pons, which is written on the. Okay, wait, let me open this. Roshni, just give me a second. Can you hear me now very well? Roshni, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, sir.
Okay, now I'll share my screen. You stop sharing. So
Okay.
I've opened in a different mode so that there is no feedback now. Let me open at my share my screen. Uh, can you see the screen?
Yes, sir, I can see your screen.
I can't see my screen. Where is it? I'm unable to see my screen. Do you see this screen now?
Yes, sir.
You can see my mouse moving. Okay, good. Right. See, this is the right. So this is the cochlea. What you see is the cochlea here. Okay. Now this is where the cochlear nucleus. This is the brainstem. And if you look at the cochlea, look at this. Just please watch my cursor over here. This is the cochlea. This is the auditory nerve. The auditory nerve takes information to the to the brain. So this is the place in the brain where the sound is sensed actually. So this is a very important place. Now, for the sound to reach this place, the auditory nerve takes information to the brain. The auditory nerve takes information to the brain. Now, how does this carry? Now, this information goes to the auditory nerve. You see, this is a cochlear nucleus, and there are different nucleus before it reaches the auditory area in the brain. Now, this is where the brainstem implant is placed. Cochlear implant is placed in the cochlea. The brainstem implant is placed in the cochlear nucleus in the brainstem. Except for this difference, everything is the same between cochlear implant and brainstem. The shape of the electrode, okay, in cochlear implant, I'll show you now. Okay. Now you see this image. The cochlear implant is We place it in the cochlea. You keep an internal receiver. See, there are two components to a cochlear implant and a brainstem implant. An external and the internal component. The external component is placed outside, internal component is placed inside the head. And they both communicate via radio frequency signals. Now, in a cochlear implant, the electrode lead goes into the cochlea here. It goes into the cochlea here. But in a brainstem implant, the same electrode goes into the cochlear nucleus. So the electrode of the cochlear implant is little, yeah. You see the difference in this picture? This is what you see on the right side is a cochlear implant. Rest all is the same. The electrode in the cochlear implant goes into the cochlea. The electrode in the brainstem implant goes to the cochlear nucleus in the brainstem. Can you see this, Roshini? Can you see this difference?
Absolutely, sir, I can see.
Yeah, so that's the difference between a cochlear implant and the brainstem implant. And if you look at this particular image, you see this is how the cochlear implant electrode looks like. Okay. Now the brainstem implant electrode looks little different. I'll show you the, and this is where the cochlear nucleus is located. This is the cochlear nucleus. So that the electrode comes and place it here in the brainstem. But however, just for information. This is how the brainstem implant looks like. They have electrodes on a pad, where the cochlear implant is like a small string array of electrodes. Okay. Except for this difference, there's no difference between a cochlear implant and a brainstem. They're all the same. Okay. And I was showing some of the outcomes to you people. Yeah. Can you see this image very clearly now? This is how the electrode looks like.
Okay.
Okay. So where the cochlear implant electrode, you all know it, it's an array of electrodes in a string. So that's the difference. These are the outcome comparisons. What you see in the red line is the performance of children with cochlear implant. This is the performance of children with the normal hearing. And what you see in the dotted lines are the performance of ABI. So some children perform as good as cochlear implantees or better than normal hearing. Some children are a little below them and some children are very poor. So vast majority of them are in the mediocre. Yeah. Okay. And just one is very poorly performing, and the other 3-4 patients are doing very well. So that's why I said the outcomes are really variable when compared to children with cochlear implant and brainstem implant. Even within the brainstem implant is good. As I told you regarding the progress of the outcome, look at this. These are the different tests that we do, and this is the performance score before at 12 months, and this is performance at 24 months. Okay, and you can see the difference. This is a test of significance, a statistical value. It doesn't make sense to you if you don't know what statistics is, but however, it means that there is a considerable amount of difference compared to 12 months and 24 months when compared to prior to surgery. This is how you need to compare them. Right. Yes. So as I told you earlier, though the outcomes are not comparable to cochlear implantees, lot of children. I mean, we compared almost 10 children in this study. In this 10 children, 3 children are doing as good as cochlear implants, and 5 children or the 5 to 6 children are doing um, near close to cochlear implants performance, but they're not as good as them. And one or two children are doing very poor. That's why I said 25 to 30% are extremely good. The remaining 60% to 65% are okay, moderately good, performing well, and 5% or less than 5% of them are very poor. So that's how the outcomes based on the data from our center, and this is a very similar data from the rest of the world as
well. What exactly is this sleek and ears test which you were mentioning?
There are different tests available to measure the performance of the skills. Okay, this is called the Little Ears Auditory Questionnaire Sleek.
Okay.
Okay, there are different tests available. Now your habilitationist will know about it. So is there any other questions that you want me to answer with? Let me look at the question answer column and see if there are any questions here. There are no open questions. Is there any other question, Roshni, that you want me to address specifically? Any questions from the audience?
Not much, except whether there is any new development coming up in which we don't have to wear anything on the outside.
Oh, you mean totally implantable devices? Yes. There's a lot of research which is going on. In fact, MERF was the first institute in the whole of Asia to do the totally implantable hearing devices. We implanted almost 5 people that. Okay, it's called the TIHA, totally implantable hearing devices, and this was long time back. Okay, and there are a lot of new. There are a lot of improvement that is required in that particular technology. So I think there's a lot of companies which is working on that, and we hope it will come out soon. If not, at least it will take not less than 2-3 years, 3-4 years. But still, we really don't know. We really don't know. There is no concrete deadline that when they can release it. I'm expecting not less than 3 to 4 years. So wait and watch. Even though it comes, it's going to be a very preliminary version. It might need a lot of modification and upgrades and improvements. As of now, we don't have.
And sir, there is someone asked as to why brainstem implant is not part of the ADIB scheme.
I don't know. It's something to do with the. No, I don't know why it is not part of it. One is, I think the government is also implementing things step by step. They will first do the cochlear implant. It might come in the future, but as of now, it is not there. See, I would say I'm saying 6-7 years before, even cochlear implant was not part of ADA. So it might come in the future, but as of now, it is not there. I don't know why. It is basically the policy makers and a lot of things. The budget, everything plays a major role.
And then, okay, child responds to loud sound after 5 months. Additional disabilities like attention deficit and behavior problems affected in therapy. I think, can you explain this thing with respect to the brainstem?
I'm not understanding the question. Can you read the question? Roshni, can you read the question for me again?
So if nerve is extremely thin and also CI has done, the child responds to loud sound after 5 months. Then there is additional disabilities like attention deficit and behavior problems affected in therapy. So how do they progress further in case of
Okay, the way I understand this question is, a child who received a cochlear implant, a child with a thin nerve received a cochlear implant, and the child is, how do you rule out the attention deficit issues in this, right? That's the question. I think, well, there are different domains to be looked at. So attention deficit is definitely possible, especially in a child with thin nerve and with other additional disabilities, because the attention deficit has nothing to do with the hearing alone. Attention deficit can be due to many other factors, right? You need to rule out one after another. You need to rule out one after another. But what you need to do is just get in touch with your habilitationist and see the two things. One is look at the attention span of the child, and depending on the other disabilities and difficulties, I think the child has to be evaluated on a different scale, on a different basis. If the question is to see how do we improve the attention span of the child, I think that's something to do with the techniques that you follow, depending on the behavior of the child and depending on the intelligence of the child, that you need to adopt some techniques, methods, or procedures to improve the attention span for this particular child. But in general, you need to look at what is the maximum attention span and the minimum attention span of the child. Based on that, you can decide whether the child's attention span is normal or whether attention span is less. And then you will be able to also tell very clearly whether the child really has an attention problem, or the child not responding to the sound is due to some other factors. If that's the question. So I don't know what exactly the parent is trying to ask. It's not very clear to me yet what exactly he's trying to ask.
so we've covered almost everything, sir.
Okay.
Thank you so
Right,
much
Roshni.
for your time, sir.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. If there are more questions and queries, they can write to me. I think Roshni has my contact, and you have my email ID, Roshni. You can share with them, and you can also share this YouTube link. They can go and watch the YouTube. They need some, but that's more of a scientific presentation. I don't know how much they will understand in general, but they're most welcome to watch if they want to learn about it. And if they have further questions, they can always write to me at any point of time. And you can give my contact to them, or they can write through you, however is convenient for you and for them as well.
Thank you so
Thank
much,
you,
sir.
Roshini, and thank you once again for patient listening. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you everyone for attending the webinar today. Sorry for the technical glitch that happened right from the beginning, but I hope whatever Ranjit sir explained nicely, he took his time to explain to us. So I hope some of you parents have understood what has been explained here. And I hope from what you have been able to understand, you help your children also to understand in their own language what they need to know. Thank you so much for your time and patience. Thank you so
Thank
much,
you.
Ranjit sir. Thank you.
Thank you.